A baby cried inside the Orc war camp, and the blind human knew it was a trap. Sael stood in chains beyond the bone-spiked walls, surrounded by human soldiers who had dragged him across the salt-glass desert to find a way in. They needed his ears. He could hear footsteps through sand, knives sliding from belts, even fear hiding inside a man's breath. But this sound was different. The cry came from deep inside the camp, beneath war drums, roaring fires, and Orc patrols sharpening axes for dawn slaughter. It was small, helpless, terrified. Then it cried again, and the ground answered. Sael felt the desert tremble under his bare feet. Not from horses, not from siege engines. Something buried far below had heard the child too. The human general smiled and ordered him forward, believing the baby was the weakness they needed. But Sael whispered, "No, that child is not calling for help." Behind the camp walls, an Orc woman screamed, and the baby cried a third time. Sael was shoved forward before he could answer. The chain around his wrists jerked hard, and he stumbled across the sharp salt-glass ground. Pain cut into his feet, but he did not cry out. He had learned years ago that pain was just another sound. It had a rhythm, a place, a distance. The soldiers behind him smelled of iron, sweat, and fear, but none of them understood what waited beyond those bone walls. General Madron Voss leaned close to Sael's ear. "You hear doors. You hear guards. You hear weakness. That is why you are alive." Sael said nothing. He had once believed the Empire saved people like him, the blind, the poor, the broken after war. Then they discovered what his ears could do. Since then, he had been used to find hidden tunnels, sleeping rebels, wounded fugitives, and villages that thought silence could protect them. Silence never protected anyone from him. A horn groaned from inside the Orc camp, deep and rough, like a beast waking in a pit. Sael turned his head. Beyond the wall he heard hundreds of sounds layered together. Armored Orc feet pounding dirt, chains scraping posts, fires snapping, wounded warriors breathing through pain, children being hushed, meat boiling in iron pots, and low voices chanting around prayer stones. This was not just a war camp, it was a hidden city of survivors. The soldiers pushed him through a narrow break beneath the outer fence, where broken tusks hung as warnings. Smoke rolled over him, thick with ash and roasted herbs. Heat brushed his face. Somewhere nearby an Orc guard laughed. Somewhere farther, a prisoner coughed blood into sand. Then the baby cried again. Sael turned toward it instantly. The cry came from the left, behind heavy cloth, beneath the smell of bitter medicine. He followed it past stacked shields and sleeping war beasts, every step careful, every breath measured. The baby's voice shook in short, broken pulses. Not hunger, not cold, not ordinary fear, a warning. Sael reached the healer's tent and slipped inside. A blade touched his throat before the tent flap fell shut. "Human," a female Orc voice hissed. Her breathing was steady, trained, dangerous. Behind her, the baby whimpered from a low cradle. Sael could hear the woman's grip tightening around the knife. "I came because of the child," he whispered. The blade pressed harder. "You came because your army sent you." "Yes," Sael admitted, "but they do not know what I heard." The baby let out a weak cry. The floor beneath them clicked. The Orc woman went still. Sael swallowed and said, "That child is waking something under this camp." Outside, heavy footsteps stopped near the tent. Someone had heard them. The footsteps stopped outside the healer's tent. Sael held his breath. The Orc woman did not move. But the knife at his throat shifted slightly, no longer pressing to kill. She was listening too, not with fear, with calculation. A shadow crossed the tent wall, huge, broad-shouldered, armored. "Vakra," a male Orc voice growled from outside. "Why is your fire still burning?" The woman's name settled in Sael's mind. Vakra. Her hand clamped over his mouth before he could breathe too loudly. Her palm was warm, rough, and smelled of smoke, herbs, and blood. The blade remained under his jaw. "I am grinding fever root," Vakra called back. Her voice changed at once, colder, sharper, obedient. 3 wounded came from the North Patrol. The Orc outside grunted. Metal scraped against bone. A spear butt tapped the ground once, then twice, and the crying? Vakra's grip tightened. Sael heard the baby in the cradle tremble, trying to hold back another sob. A newborn should not understand danger, yet this one seemed to feel every voice around it. "One of the camp mothers lost milk," Vakra said. The child is hungry. There was a pause. Then the guard said, Marshal Ruck wants all infants checked before moonset. Vakra did not answer immediately. Sael felt the silence, stretched like a rope around both their throats. Then he can send his order in daylight, she said. If I wake every sick child now, he will have corpses before he has soldiers. A low snarl came from outside. For one breath, Sael thought the guard would enter. Then the footsteps moved away. Only when the sound faded into drums and crackling fire did Vakra pull Sael backward and throw him to the floor. He landed hard on his shoulder, chains clinking beneath him. You have 10 breaths to explain, she said. Then I cut your throat and feed your body to the ash pits. Sael pushed himself up slowly. The child's cry has a pattern. All children cry, not like this. Vakra laughed once without humor. A blind human walks into an Orc war camp and tells me how babies should cry? I know sounds, Sael said. It is the only reason I am alive. The baby whimpered again. Sael turned toward the cradle, though he could not see it. May I come closer? No. Then listen. He tapped 2 fingers against the floor. Tap, pause, tap, tap, long pause, tap. The baby answered with a thin cry, matching the rhythm almost exactly. Vakra went silent. Sael tapped again, slower this time. The baby's cry broke, softened, then repeated the same pattern in a weaker tone. What is that? Vakra asked. A warning rhythm, Sael said. Older than the Empire. I heard it once beneath a ruined bell tower after the Glassfall Wars. The stones made the same sound before the ground opened. Wind struck the tent, rattling hanging bones and medicine charms. Outside, the war camp roared with life, but inside, the small space felt sealed away from the world. Vakra moved toward the cradle. Sael heard cloth shifting, a tiny body being lifted, the soft, wet sound of the baby's mouth searching for air after crying too long. He has done this since birth, Vakra said quietly. Every night. Every time the war drums begin, he? Sael asked. His name is Eru, that surprised him. Orcs in Imperial stories did not name weak children. They did not sing to them. They did not hide them in healers' tents or lie to armed guards for them. Vakra heard the change in his breathing. Do not pity us, human. I wasn't. You were. Sael lowered his head. I was wrong about this camp. Vakra stepped closer. And what did you think it was? A place full of monsters. Her blade touched his cheek this time, not cutting, only warning. And your army outside. What are they? Sael had no answer. The baby began to fuss again. Vakra tried to hush him, but her voice was too tense, too afraid. The child felt it and cried harder. The floor clicked beneath them, tiny cracks answering the sound. Sael's skin turned cold. Let me try something, he said. No. If he keeps crying, your marshal will hear him. So will my general. Vakra cursed under her breath. Then she stepped near enough for Sael to feel the baby's warmth. If you harm him, she whispered, blind or not, I will make your death last until sunrise. Sael nodded. He lifted his chained hands slowly and hummed. It was not a song of the Empire. It was a poor village lullaby his mother used to sing before war took her voice forever. Soft, uneven, simple. At first, baby Eru cried over it. Then the cry weakened. Vakra's breath caught. Sael hummed the melody again, and this time Vakra joined with a low Orc mourning chant. Her voice was deep, rough and beautiful in a painful way, like stone warmed by fire. Human lullaby and Orc grief twisted together inside the tent. Baby Eru grew quiet. For the first time since Sael had entered the camp, the ground stopped clicking. Vakra slowly pulled the blade away from his face. Your army attacks before dawn? She asked. Yes, how many? Enough to burn this camp, and you led them here? Sael closed his useless eyes. Yes. A long silence followed. Then Vakra placed a wooden cup against his chained hands. Drink. The water was bitter with herbs, but Sael drank like a starving man. Vakra moved back to the cradle. You will help me keep him silent until moonset, and after that. Before she could answer, a horn blasted outside. Not a war horn, an inspection call. Vakra whispered one word, sharp with fear. Rock. The inspection horn rolled through the camp again. This time, every sound outside changed. Warriors stopped laughing. Chains stopped rattling. Mothers hushed children so quickly, the silence itself felt wounded. Even the war beasts lowered their growls, as if they knew the name Vakra had whispered. Rock. Sael heard armored boots moving in organized lines. Not patrols, search parties. Heavy bodies pushed through tents, shoved aside supply crates, kicked open sleeping quarters. Somewhere a child cried out and was immediately silenced by a terrified parent. Vakra moved fast. She wrapped baby Iru in a thicker cloth and tied him against her chest beneath a dark healer's cloak. The baby gave one weak sound, but Vakra pressed her chin down and began humming the orc chant again. Her voice shook less now. She had turned fear into motion. Sael rose, chains dragging. "Untie me. No. If I walk like a prisoner, every guard will hear the chain. If I untie you, you may run. To where?" Sael asked. "My army wants the camp. Your marshal wants the child. I'm safer with neither." That made her pause. Outside, a tent pole snapped. An orc woman shouted in anger. A male voice ordered her to kneel. Then came the sharp slap of a gauntlet against flesh. Vakra cut Sael's wrist chain with a small hooked blade. "Try to betray me," she said, "and I will not need my eyes to find your heart." Sael rubbed his raw wrists. "I believe you." She pushed a folded cloth into his hands. "Cover your face. Walk like a wounded servant. Keep your head low. I am blind, not foolish. Tonight you must be both." They slipped out through the rear of the healer's tent into a narrow path between stacked shields and drying hides. The air was thick with smoke and desert heat. Fires burned in iron baskets, painting the camp in pulsing orange light Sael could only feel through warmth on his skin. Above them, bone charms clattered in the wind like teeth. He listened. 3 guards to the right, 1 limping, 2 carrying spears. A beast cage ahead, iron door loose. Children hidden under a wagon to the left. Roke's searchline moving from the central fire pit outward. "Left," Sael whispered. Vakra obeyed without arguing. They moved behind a row of meat racks, where the smell of blood helped hide their scent. Baby Iru breathed against Vakra's chest in tiny broken pulls. Each breath sounded too large to Sael, too important, as if the whole desert had bent close to hear it. "Why does Rock want him?" Sael asked. Vakra's steps slowed. "Because Iru was born under a dead war banner. That means something." "To my people, yes. A child born under a fallen banner belongs to the clan's unfinished war. If the child is strong, he is trained. If strange, he is tested. If feared, he is killed." Vakra did not answer, and that was answer enough. They reached a low storage trench dug beneath the camp. Vakra pulled Sael down into it, just as guards passed above them. Sand spilled over his shoulders. Baby Iru shifted, and Sael heard the beginning of a cry forming in the child's throat. Not now. Sael leaned closer and hummed his mother's lullaby, as softly as breath. The baby stilled. Above them, a guard said, "Marshal says the marked infant has glass on his tusk." Sael felt Vakra go rigid. Another guard spat. "Glass means old magic." "No," the first muttered. "Glass means human blood." The guards moved on. Sael waited until their footsteps faded. "Is that true?" Vakra climbed out of the trench without answering. Vakra, she kept walking. He followed the sound of her cloak, the scrape of her boots, the tiny heartbeat hidden beneath her chest. At last they stopped behind a broken siege cart near the western fence. Wind hissed through the cracked wood. "His mother was Orc," Vakra said, "a scout from the Ash Tusk Riders. His father was human." Sael said nothing. Vakra's voice hardened as if she expected disgust. "He was a prisoner at first, then a translator, then something neither camp would forgive. And they died? They were executed before Iru opened his eyes. A distant boom shook the desert. Sael turned toward the sound, human siege wheels. The Empire was closer. Vakra heard it too. "Your general?" "Yes. How long?" Sael listened past the camp noise, past the wind, past his own guilt. Wooden wheels, iron rims. 40, maybe 50 horses. Men breathing through cloth masks. Oil jars clinking in crates. Less than an hour. Vakra cursed softly. Baby Iru whimpered, and beneath their feet the salt glass gave a faint answering tick. Sael crouched and touched the ground. "This is not only a camp, is it?" Vakra was silent. "What is buried here?" The wind dropped. For one terrible moment, Sael heard nothing from the desert at all. Then Vakra said, "Before humans and orcs hated each other, they buried something under this place together. The old mothers called it the listener beneath. A thing that wakes when enough innocent blood calls to it." Sael's mouth went dry. And Iru's cry, Reaches it, Vakra finished. Another horn screamed from the center of camp. This one was closer. Roke's voice followed, huge and brutal, shaking through the night. Bring me the healer, woman. Bring me the blind human. Bring me the child with the glass-marked tusk. Vakra turned toward Sael. How does he know about you? She whispered. Before Sael could answer, a human arrow struck the siege cart beside them. Wrapped in red signal cloth, Sael knew that cloth by sound alone. His general had marked him. The Empire was not waiting for dawn anymore. The arrow trembled in the broken siege cart. Sael heard the red signal cloth snapping in the wind. He did not need eyes to know what it meant. General Voss had used that signal before, once on a village gate, once on a rebel tunnel, once on a cave where children had been hiding from rain and soldiers. Marked target. Sael stepped back as if the arrow had struck his own chest. Vakra saw his face change. What is it? My army found my trail. You said they were outside the camp. They were, Sael whispered. Now they are inside the killing distance. A roar rose from the eastern wall. Human horns answered orc drums. The first flaming stones flew over the camp, cutting through the black sky like falling suns. One smashed into a beast pen, and the night exploded with screams, iron fire, and the terrified bellowing of chained war animals. Baby Iru woke against Vakra's chest. His cry broke loose. The ground answered at once, not with a small click this time, with a deep sound beneath the desert, like a giant inhaling after centuries of sleep. Vakra grabbed Sael's arm. Move! They ran along the western fence, but the camp was collapsing into chaos. Orc warriors rushed toward the walls. Mothers dragged children beneath wagons. Wounded soldiers crawled from tents as sparks rained over them. Smoke thickened until even Sael's hearing felt crowded. Too many sounds, too many deaths beginning at once. Then Roke's voice thundered over everything. Seal the gates. No one leaves with the child. A line of orc guards blocked the path ahead, bone masks covering their faces. At their center stood Rock Tarskork. Even without sight, Sael knew him by weight. Every step sank hard into the salt-glass ground. His armor groaned with trophies, teeth, rings, broken blades, pieces of old enemies tied to his chest. His breathing was calm while the camp burned around him. Vakra stopped. Baby Iru cried harder. Rock turned his head toward the sound. There you are. Vakra pulled the cloak tighter around the child. He is only a baby, Rock laughed. No. He is the weapon our dead grandfathers promised us. Another flaming stone crashed behind them. Heat slapped Sael's back. Somewhere a tent collapsed over screaming people. Rock pointed his axe toward Sael, and the blind human brought the Empire exactly where it needed to stand. Vakra looked at Sael. For one painful second, distrust returned between them. Sael shook his head. I did not tell him, Rock smiled. You did not need to. His blood mark is on you. Sael froze. Vakra ripped the cloth from his shoulder and found what Sael could only feel now. A tiny metal thorn buried beneath his skin, pulsing with a faint tick. Imperial tracking iron. The general had planted it while Sael slept in chains. Sael's throat tightened. Even his betrayal had been used before he understood it. Vakra's anger shifted from him to the Empire. They marked you like livestock. They mark anything they plan to spend, Sael said. Roke stepped closer. Enough. Give me the child. No. The word came from behind them. A silent guard moved out of the smoke. Nalak Ve Orc, the banner warrior who never spoke. His scarred face was bare, his weapon lowered, his body placed between Rock and Vakra. Rock's voice darkened. You helped her. Nalak did not answer. He only turned his spear sideways, blocking the marshal's path. Roke's guards raised their blades. Then baby Iru screamed. The sound was no longer just a cry. It became a clear ringing note that sliced through drums, horns, fire, and battle. Every warrior nearby staggered. Even Rock took one step back. The salt glass beneath them split open in white glowing lines. Sael dropped to his knees. Hands pressed to the ground. Now he heard it clearly. Not one sound beneath the desert. Thousands. Old voices. Human and orc together, not fighting, singing, praying, sealing something away. Sael lifted his head. This camp was built over a seal. Rock's eyes burned with triumph. Yes, Vakra whispered. No. Rock raised his axe high, and the glowing cracks brightened around him. Our ancestors were cowards. They buried the listener beneath instead of commanding it. But the child's blood is mixed. Human breath, orc bone, glass-marked tusk. He can wake what they feared. Sael understood then. Baby Iru was not cursed, he was a key. The child's cry could open the ancient prison under the camp, not because he was evil, but because both races lived inside him. From beyond the smoke, General Voss shouted orders in the human tongue. "Follow the sound. The weapon is in the western quarter." Vakra clutched Iru with both arms. Both sides want him. Sael stood slowly. Around them, orc guards advanced. Behind them, human soldiers pushed through the burning tents. Above them, sparks spun into the night like angry stars. Beneath them, the buried listener stirred, answering every frightened cry from the child in Vakra's arms. Rock held out his hand. "Give him to me. Vakra, and I will make our enemies kneel forever." From the smoke behind Sael, General Voss called out, "Cold and clear, hand over the infant, Sael, and I will give you your freedom." Baby Iru whimpered between them, and for the first time, Sael realized the real war was not human against orc. It was everyone against one helpless child. Sael stood between two voices that promised him safety. One came from Rock Tarsk, thick with war and pride. The other came from General Voss, cold as iron, wrapped in the language of freedom. Both men wanted the same thing. Not peace, not mercy, not the life of the child. They wanted baby Iru's cry. Vakra backed away with the infant pressed to her chest. Smoke curled around her broad shoulders. Firelight flashed along her tusks and the edge of her blade. Her healer's cloak was torn, her arms streaked with ash, but her grip on the child did not loosen. "He belongs to no army," she said. Rock's face twisted. "He belongs to the blood that made him." General Voss stepped from the smoke behind Sael, surrounded by human soldiers with oil bows raised. Then his human half answers to me. Baby Iru whimpered. The glowing cracks under the camp widened. A deep pulse rolled beneath the salt glass desert. Every person standing there felt it rise through their bones. Some orc warriors dropped their weapons. Human soldiers looked down in terror. The ground was not breaking randomly anymore. It was forming a circle. Sael heard the shape before anyone understood it. A soundstone ring buried below the camp. "Vakra," he said, turning his head toward her voice. "There is a chamber beneath us." "How deep?" "Not deep enough," Rock heard him. "Yes, blind man." "The old seal. The place where cowards trapped a god." "Not a god," Sael said. "A listener." Rock lifted his axe. "Then let it listen to our vengeance." He charged. Nalak Veork moved first. The silent banner guard threw himself into Rock's path, spear-striking axe with a crack that cut through the battlefield. Rock roared and drove forward, forcing Nalak back step by step. Sparks burst between their weapons. Nalak did not speak, did not shout, did not ask for honor. He only bought time. "Go." Vakra shouted. Sael grabbed her wrist and pulled her toward the sound he heard below, the hollow echo beneath the broken ground. They ran as arrows hissed past them. One struck Vakra's shoulder. She stumbled but did not fall. Baby Iru began to cry again, sharper now, frightened by the blood, the fire, the hands reaching for him. The ground opened. Sael felt air rush upward from below, ancient and cold. He dropped to his knees at the edge of a cracked stairway hidden under the camp floor. This way. They descended into darkness. For Sael, darkness changed nothing. For Vakra, it stole the battlefield behind her. The chamber below smelled of old stone, salt, and dead rain. Strange carved pillars surrounded them, each one covered in marks made by both human hands and orc claws. The past was written together here, even if the living had forgotten it. Vakra stared at the walls. "Our marks, and mine," Sael said, touching the carvings. Above them, boots thundered. Rock and Voss were coming. At the center of the chamber stood a broken circle of soundstones. Baby Iru's cry struck them, and they answered with pale light. Under the floor, something enormous shifted. A voice rose without words. It did not speak into ears. It entered guilt. Sael heard children screaming in the village he had once revealed to the Empire. Vakra heard newborns she had failed to save in war tents. Human soldiers above heard homes they had burned. Orc warriors heard prisoners they had dragged behind horses. The listener beneath did not judge with language. It returned every buried cry to the ones who had ignored it. Vakra nearly collapsed. Sael caught her. "I can't hold him," she whispered. "Yes, you can. He is opening it. No, Sael said. Fear is opening it. Rock stormed into the chamber, bleeding from his brow. Narlak's broken spear lodged in his armor. General Voss followed from the other stair with soldiers behind him. Both armies had reached the same buried place. Rock pointed his axe at Iru. Make him cry louder, Voss raised his bow. Give him to me, Sael. Sael laughed once, bitter and broken. You still think I want your freedom? You want to live. I have lived as your chain long enough. He reached into his coat and pulled out the small pouch of sound map stones tied to his belt. Each stone carried years of his work, roots, echoes, hidden paths, secrets the Empire had forced him to collect. Without them, he was useless to Voss. Without them, he was no longer a weapon. Sael crushed the pouch beneath his heel. The stones cracked. Voss's voice broke with fury. You blind fool, Vakra understood. Slowly, she lifted her own blade and cut the long war midwife braid from her hair. The braid fell onto the glowing floor, heavy with beads, bone rings, and the rank her clan had given her. I will not deliver children into war anymore, she said. Rock lunged. Narlak appeared from the stairway behind him, wounded but alive. With the last of his strength, he slammed Rock sideways into a pillar. The marshal's axe flew from his hand. Now, Sael shouted. Vakra held baby Iru over the soundstone circle, not as an offering, but as a child being shown the truth of where he came from. Sael began humming his mother's lullaby. Vakra joined with the Orc morning chant. At first, Iru cried harder, then the two songs wrapped around his fear, human grief. Orc grief. One rhythm. The baby's cry changed. It softened into a clear note, no longer panic, no longer pain. The soundstones flared bright. Above them, soldiers from both armies fell to their knees, hands over their ears, weeping at memories they could no longer bury. Beneath the chamber, the listener's vast eye opened in the glass. Sael could not see it, but he felt its attention pass over him like a cold moon. For one breath it could have risen. Instead, baby Iru sighed. The eye closed. The chamber released a final wave of sound so powerful it blew out every fire in the camp. Rock collapsed. Voss dropped his bow. The war horns cracked in half above ground, and in the sudden silence, the only sound left was the baby breathing against Vakra's heart. For a moment no one moved. The whole desert seemed to be holding its breath. Above the buried chamber, the Orc war camp had gone silent. No drums, no horns, no war beasts clawing at their cages, no soldiers shouting victory or death. The fires that had swallowed tents and banners were gone, snuffed out by the listener's final wave, as if an invisible ocean had passed through the camp. Only baby Iru breathed, small, uneven, alive. Vakra held him against her chest with both arms, her body shaking now that the fight had ended. Blood ran from the arrow wound in her shoulder, dark against her torn healer's cloak, but she did not look at it. Her eyes stayed on the child's face. Sael stood beside her, one hand pressed against a soundstone pillar. The chamber still hummed faintly under his palm. It was not dangerous now. It felt tired, like something ancient had finally returned to sleep. General Voss was the first to move. He pushed himself up from the floor, breathing hard. His bow lay broken near his feet. Around him, his soldiers remained on their knees, some crying openly, some staring at nothing, trapped inside memories the listener had forced them to hear. Voss looked at Sael with hatred. You ruined everything, he said. Sael turned his head toward him. No, I stopped carrying it for you. Voss stepped closer, but one of his own soldiers grabbed his arm. Sir, the man whispered, voice cracked with fear. We heard them. Voss pulled away. Heard what? The soldier looked toward the glowing floor, then toward baby Iru. The children, in the villages, in the tunnels, in the places we were told were empty. Voss's silence was answer enough. Across the chamber, Roke Taskork coughed blood and tried to rise. Nalak Veork stood over him, wounded badly, one hand pressed to his ribs. The silent guard's breath was wet and heavy, but his spear point remained aimed at the marshal's throat. Rock glared at Vakra. You have made us weak, he growled. Vakra stepped toward him slowly. Her cut braid lay behind her on the floor, stripped from her like a dead life. No, she said. I have kept us from becoming nothing but hunger. Roke spat at her feet. You chose a half-blood child over your clan, Vakra. Look down at Iru. The baby's tiny, glass-marked, Tusk caught the pale glow of the stones. I chose a child over a grave. Rock turned his eyes to the orc guards who had followed him below. Take her. No one moved. The guards stared at the baby, at the ancient mixed carvings on the walls, at the human and orc marks carved side by side. They had heard the old voices too. They had heard their ancestors singing together, not as enemies, but as allies, sealing away the listener beneath, before hatred had poisoned memory. One by one, the guards lowered their weapons. Rock's face twisted with disbelief. Above them, dawn began to touch the broken camp. They climbed out of the chamber slowly, not as victors, not as prisoners, but as people who had seen the bottom of their own war and found a crying child there. The salt-glass desert had changed. Cracks spread across the camp floor in bright white patterns, but they no longer widened. The bone towers still stood, though many were burned. Tents had collapsed. War banners hung in torn strips. Human siege carts smoldered beyond the wall. Orc shields lay scattered beside imperial helmets, but no one was fighting. Human soldiers stood on one side of the camp, wounded and stunned. Orc warriors stood on the other, equally silent. Between them, mothers searched for children. Healers dragged the injured from ash, and frightened young fighters stared at enemies they had been told could never cry. Never fear, never love. Sael heard all of it, the quiet sobs, the shaking breaths, the clatter of weapons being dropped, the soft calls of names in both languages. For the first time in years, he did not use sound to find weakness. He used it to find the living. Vakra nearly fell at the healer's tent. But Sael caught her elbow. "You are losing blood," he said. "So are many others. You are also impossible." A tired smile touched her voice. "And you are still blind, human." "Yes," Sael said. "But I noticed." She gave a weak laugh, then winced. They laid baby Iru in the same low cradle where Sael had first heard him. Around the tent, orc mothers gathered. Some had hated the child because they had feared what he meant. Now they came with water, cloth, milk, and trembling hands. One old orc woman touched Iru's glass-marked tusk and began to weep. "My grandmother told me this mark was a lie," she whispered. "A story from before the blood years." Sael sat beside the tent entrance, while Vakra's wound was bound. He could hear General Voss outside, arguing with his officers, ordering retreat, trying to gather power back into his voice. But the soldiers no longer moved quickly for him. The Empire had not been defeated by swords. It had been interrupted by memory. By noon, Voss left the camp with what remained of his army. He did not thank Sael. He did not threaten him either. Perhaps he knew threats no longer had chains to hold on to. Sael's sound map stones were dust beneath the earth, and the blind man who had once guided massacres was gone with them. Rock was stripped of command before sunset, not by humans, by his own camp. The mothers spoke first. Then the wounded. Then the young warriors who had heard the old seal song and realized their clan's greatest truth had been buried under generations of war pride. Tlalak Veork, though still silent, placed Rock's broken axe at Vakra's feet. She did not pick it up. "I am not your marshal," she said. An orc warrior asked, "Then what are you?" Vakra looked toward the healer's tent, where baby Iru slept at last. "I am a woman who will not let children be fed to banners." That became the beginning, not peace. Not yet. Peace was too large a word for people who still carried fresh graves in their hearts. But 3 days later, at the edge of the salt-glass desert, Vakra led a small group away from the ruined camp. Orc mothers came with children considered weak, strange, mixed, cursed, or unwanted. A few human soldiers followed too, men and women who refused to return to Voss after hearing the truth beneath the ground. Sael walked with them, guided not by chains but by voices that trusted him. They built their refuge near a line of wind-carved stones where the desert sang softly at night. Broken war banners became shade cloth. Shield rims became cradle frames. Spears were hammered into fence posts. The first fire they lit was not for war but for soup. Weeks passed, then months. The refuge had no name at first. People called it the quiet place, the no-banner camp, the edge shelter. Children called it home before adults were brave enough to do the same. Sael taught the children how to listen to the desert, without fearing it. He showed them how footsteps could reveal mood, how wind could warn of storms, how silence could be full instead of empty. Vakra taught them herbs, bandages, old orc songs, and the difference between strength and cruelty. Baby Iru grew slowly, safely, loudly. His cry no longer cracked the ground. Sometimes, when he laughed, the salt glass stones around the camp rang like tiny bells. Everyone would stop for a second, afraid the listener might answer, but it never did. It only listened, and perhaps, for now listening was enough. One evening, as the sun lowered red and gold over the desert, Sael sat outside the shelter with Eru asleep in his lap. Vakra stood nearby, planting the last broken war banner into the sand as a shade pole. The cloth snapped once in the wind, no longer a symbol of conquest, only protection from the heat. Sael tilted his head. Children were laughing in two languages. Orc and human voices mixed over cooking fires. Someone was singing the old lullaby. Someone else answered with the morning chant, but it no longer sounded like grief. Vakra came and sat beside him. "Do you hear danger?" she asked. Sael listened for a long moment. The desert breathed. The children played. Baby Eru slept with one tiny hand curled around Sael's finger. "No," he said softly. "For once I hear tomorrow." And beneath the salt glass earth, far below banners, bones, and buried wars, the listener beneath remained still.